Let's talk about MC Hammer, the man, the rapper, Stanley Kirk Burrell from Oakland. The problem with how people talk about him now is that they treat him like a brand, a phase, a costume, or a joke, instead of a real human being who walked into rooms and changed how everybody behaved. If you don't anchor this story to him as a person, you miss the entire point. MC Hammer didn't move like a metaphor. He moved like a man, and that distinction is crucial. See, MC Hammer didn't come out of nowhere. He didn't fall into rap by accident. And he definitely didn't come from a soft environment. He grew up in Oakland, California, at a time when Oakland was not friendly, not forgiving, and not impressed by smiles or dancing. Before anyone knew him as MC Hammer, he was already known in his city as Stanley, the dude who ran with real people. And that's where the story begins, not on MTV, not in a Pepsi commercial, but on the ground in Oakland. When MC Hammer got famous, he didn't reinvent himself. He amplified who he already was. People who were around back then have been consistent about this part. Hammer always had a crew. And not a fake entourage, not stylists, not yes men, but real dudes from his neighborhood people who had reputations that carried weight. He didn't clean it up for the cameras. He kept them with him everywhere. That decision alone shaped how the industry treated him. It's one thing to see a smiling rapper dancing on stage. People like to pretend that doesn't matter, but it always has and always will. Respect in those spaces isn't about image. It's about consequences. That's why you didn't hear comedians clowning him to his face back then. That's why you didn't see rappers casually dissing him in interviews. That's why executives watched their tone when his name came up. Because MC Hammer wasn't just a performer. He was a presence. And that presence came from how he lived, not how he dressed. This is where public memory gets dishonest. People see the dancing in the baggy pants and assume softness. But the people who were actually there say something very different. They say MC Hammer was known to check people directly when he felt disrespected. And not in a rap beef way, not in a lyrical sparring way. There are multiple accounts from that era where artists and comedians have admitted they changed jokes, removed jokes, or avoided saying certain things because they didn't want that problem. And again, this isn't about glorifying violence. It's about telling the truth of how people behaved around him. Behavior doesn't lie. If everyone in a room is acting careful around one person, that tells you something. MC Hammer himself has spoken openly in interviews about how people mistook his kindness for weakness. This wasn't some secret whisper campaign. This was said out loud by him and by others. About Hammer allegedly confronting people who disrespected him publicly. About Hammer allegedly putting pressure on folks who crossed him. About Hammer allegedly funding his crew in a way that made people think twice before playing games. These stories didn't come from nowhere. They came from a pattern of behavior that people observed and passed down. The key word here is allegedly, because we're not courts. We're talking about public narrative, cultural memory, and repeated accounts from people who were present. And the reason these stories stick is because they match how people acted around him at the time. If MC Hammer was really just a harmless joke, none of this would exist. Nobody would have been scared. Nobody would have adjusted their behavior. Nobody would have stayed quiet. And the silence is always the tell. MC Hammer came up in an era where rap was still directly connected to the streets. There wasn't a clean separation yet. You couldn't just hide behind PR teams and social media statements. If you said something wild about somebody, you might actually have to see them. And MC Hammer was known as someone who didn't hide from that reality. Then there's the financial side, which people love using as a punchline without understanding the context. MC Hammer didn't lose his money because he was stupid or naive. He lost his money because he chose loyalty over longevity. And that choice was consistent with who he was as a man. He kept hundreds of people on his payroll, not because he was flexing, but because he felt responsible for them. He paid for homes, cars, funerals, legal fees, entire lifestyles. That kind of generosity combined with that level of loyalty, is not sustainable forever. And when the money dried up, the industry that once treated him carefully suddenly felt comfortable rewriting the story. That's when the jokes started. That's when the disrespect crept in. That years when people who would never have said a word to his face back then started laughing in hindsight. And that tells you everything about how fake industry memory can be. Because respect in those spaces is often rented, not permanent. MC Hammer experienced that shift in real time. He understands exactly what happened. He understands who stayed solid and who disappeared. He's spoken about how the same people who benefited from his generosity later distanced themselves when it was no longer profitable. That part of the story rarely gets told because it makes people uncomfortable. It forces them to admit that Hammer wasn't weak. He was overextended, and those are not the same thing. When you look at how later artists modeled their entourages, their security, their loyalty structures, MC Hammer was an early blueprint. He showed how power could move quietly, how smiling didn't mean harmless, how a black man could be both charismatic and feared at the same time. Money has a way of deciding how stories get told. The uncomfortable truth is that most of the disrespect directed at MC Hammer only came after his power was gone. People rarely punch up. They wait until it's safe. That's a universal rule. The next time somebody jokes about Hammer going broke or wearing parachute pants, it's worth remembering there was a long stretch of time where nobody joked about him at all because the consequences weren't worth it. And that's not legend. That's lived experience from people who were there. This story still matters because it exposes how shallow the industry's respect really is, and how quickly narratives shift once a person no longer has leverage. MC Hammer the man, the rapper, the Oakland native lived that full arc, from feared to mocked, not because he changed, but because the environment around him did. If he came out today with the same smile, the same dancing, and the same deep ties, people would still be confused. Because folks still judge danger by appearance instead of behavior and association. And that misunderstanding is exactly why his story keeps getting retold wrong. Correcting it isn't about protecting his image. It's about telling the truth about how power actually worked around him. Because MC Hammer wasn't a symbol. He was a person, a black man moving through a dangerous industry, making choices that had real consequences. And pretending otherwise is just another way people erase uncomfortable realities once they feel safe enough to laugh. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, consider liking the video and subscribing for more stories like this. See you next time.